Happy New Year to all the listeners and happy birthday to all the horses. Let's bring in the new year at the Win Place Show in style. Salutations and welcome, friends. My name is Matthew DeSantis. You can find me on Twitter at Fail to Menace. And welcome to the Win Place Show, a horse racing program devoted to give you the latest of handicapping and horse racing news that is proudly part of the Trust the Profits YouTube channel. Now, if this is your first time watching the Win Place Show, what we do here is race recaps, track news, jockey news, trainer news, general industry updates. We also have interviews with figures across the industry throughout the year. And so be looking out for those in the coming weeks as well. But make sure to subscribe to Trust the Profits on YouTube. Make sure to give me a follow on Twitter at the handle at Fail to Menace. That way you can be caught up on all the latest content that we're putting out, because here on Trust the Profits, we have a lot of big things planned in 2023, not just the Win Place Show. Obviously, I'll also continue to do Capping the Card. Have a really great guest this week, Josh Rodriguez from On the Wrong Lead. We're going to be capping the Saturday card at Santa Anita. Now, if you tuned in last week and saw me cap the card at Gulfstream Park, yikes, not one of my better days. This was after two really big winners weeks at both Oaklawn Aqueduct, actually 3 straight weeks at Oaklawn Aqueduct and Santa Anita. Did really, really well. Last week, not so well. But listen, I'm not one to sit here and cry over spilled milk, so to speak. But I did want to make sure that money went to a good cause. So after a really rough day at Gulfstream Park, I did something that always makes me feel good. I donated $50 to the South Florida SPCA, try to help the horses. That's what this is all about. And always try to promote equine advocacy whenever I can. And so even if I'm not winning at the track, at least I know I'm winning off the track by helping out the animals that we all love so much. So like I said, make sure to follow us on YouTube at Trust the Profits. Like I said, check us out on Twitter, all the different handles. We got a lot of great stuff. Colin Sheehan's got all this great derby prep. El Hombre's got the lounge on Thursday nights. That's always a ton of fun. And Formulator, of course, the Formula has always got his graded stakes previews. So a lot of content here, no matter what type of stuff you like. Well, let's dive into what we did this week and what we learned from this past weekend. Obviously, a big happy new year to everyone. Hope your 2023 has started off well. But this is, of course, birthday for all North American horses as well. So they all turned another age. So now the 2-year-olds are now 3-year-olds. The 3-year-olds are now 4-year-olds, etc. So always a big happy birthday to all of the horses out there and all the horse people that work with them. I know it's a kind of a special day when they turn the page and these horses become a year older in terms of their racing forms. Now, let's dive into the race recap from this past weekend, and we'll start down in South Florida where we had those 6 graded stakes races. And we'll start in particular with the Harlan's Holiday. And this was kind of the prep for the Pegasus World Cup. This was won by Skippy Longstocking, a horse that really up to this point had not shown a lot of ability, I think, at this distance and at this on the surface. Skippy Longstocking was always a horse that seemed to want to go longer, seemed to like stretching out more. I remember even going back to that Wood Memorial, Skippy Longstocking comes running late to hit third in that race behind early voting. And so that was one of those horses where I just thought, this horse might need a little more ground. A mile and a 16th for the Harlan's Holiday, not maybe ideal. Also, it's the son of Exaggerator. Exaggerator, of course, known for winning in the slop, and a lot of his progeny also like winning in wet conditions. And that's where we saw Skippy get that big win in his career, was at Mountaineer and that West Virginia Derby in the slop. And so I thought, well, dry conditions, a little bit of a shorter distance, 8.5 furlongs. Didn't know if this horse was going to take to it. Well, took to it beautifully, ran a career best 106 by her speed figure. Second place, real close battle between Pioneer Medina and Simplification. Simplification earning a career best 103 by her speed figure. And Simplification is a horse that you all know I love, and I've talked a lot about on this program and others. I thought he ran a good race. I thought he looked a little bit better than he had looked certainly in that Breeders' Cup Mile, and I would even argue maybe in that Pennsylvania Derby before that. But Simplification also is a horse that he loomed up on the outside of Skippy and Pioneer and Medina, and I thought, okay, like, is this the time he's gonna make a run? And he just really flattened out. Pioneer and Medina ended up nosing him out for second. I still just don't think I just really do wish Simplification would get like a 3-month rest. I think a lot would, and maybe he'll get that after the Pegasus World Cup. I would imagine that he probably will at that point, and I think that'll be the best thing for him. The disappointing effort, and even his trainer said so, was O'Connor, who was the morning line favorite for Safi Joseph Jr. Of course, Safi trains Skippy Longstocking as well, who won. But Safi, talking to DRF after the race, was really disappointed in O'Connor's effort and thought this horse really should have improved a little bit more. So we'll see. All 4 of those horses, Skippy Longstocking, Pioneer, Medina, Simplification, and O'Connor, all hoping to get invitations to the Pegasus World Cup later this month down at Gulfstream Park. Those 4, if they get the invitations, which I would imagine they will join Cyberknife and White Abario as the 2 kind of other big names waiting at the Pegasus World Cup. Now, Cyberknife, this will be his final race. And this is something that I think a lot of us are kind of bummed out about, because Cyberknife seemed to be a horse that was getting better and better and better the older he got, the more he ran. And to take another horse like that off the table, so to speak, for next year is disappointing. And I think particularly going back and looking at last year's Pegasus World Cup, if we could juxtapose last year's to this year's Pegasus World Cup, we had Life is Good facing up with Nick Sko. Now, you might say there wasn't much else in that field, okay? And I wouldn't disagree with you. I mean, Stiletto Boy finished 3rd in that race. I like Stiletto Boy a lot. I really like that horse, especially at a mile and a 16th, sometimes a mile and an eighth. But I like Stiletto Boy. I'm probably higher on that horse than some. But, after that, it was like Sir Winston. I mean, perfectly fine horses, but there wasn't a lot of other big names. But still, you had the 2 headliners up top, Life is Good and Nick's Go. One was Horse of the Year. One was coming off a Breeders' Cup Mile championship. And what do we have this year? We have, Cyberknife coming off a 2nd place at the Breeders' Cup Mile to Cody's Wish. We have White Abario, who hasn't, I don't think, run since the Pennsylvania Derby. You have Skippy coming off this win at the Harlan's Holiday. Pioneer at Medina, who does seem to have turned a little bit of a corner after an optional claiming win, and now 2nd place there. Simplification, who was a Fountain of Youth winner. It's got a little bit of cachet. O'Connor, kind of a little bit of an unknown horse coming up from Chile, but still really lacking the firepower. And you could argue, is this really a grade 1 to some extent? And I think it probably is, just based upon who else is out there. It's the best that we kind of have to offer at this point. Now, is that good enough for a grade 1? Well, that's maybe up to the eye of the beholder. But this is the same issue we had with the Clark. If you remember when we went back and looked at that race at Churchill Downs, that was one where 3-4 weeks after the Breeders' Cup, just none of the older dirt classic division horses were going to run in that race, because they'd all run in either the Breeders' Cup Mile or the Breeders' Cup Classic. And so you ended up with, Rich Strike being the only one who kind of came back and didn't run particularly well there. And you had a lot of other kind of grade 2, grade 3 type horses that were suddenly running in a grade 1. Of course, the Clark did get downgraded to a grade 2 for next year. But I think this speaks less to those individual races, and it speaks more to perhaps the overall amount of grade 1, grade 2 races that are out there in this particular division. And then just frankly, the dearth of quality horses in this division that, it's hard to say, oh, this is a grade 1 because you have Cyberknife. Okay, Cyberknife's a good horse. Certainly won of his fair share of grade 1s with the Arkansas Derby, with the Haskell. Absolutely. But, that's about the headliner. And you get past that and it's like, okay, White Abario won the Florida Derby and hasn't really done anything since then. And, Simplification won the Fountain of Youth and hasn't won anything since then. And Skippy's won a grade, 2 grade 3s. It finished 3rd at the Belmont. But, outside of that, it's just, like I said, it's a lot of horses. You look at the resume, you go, this doesn't necessarily scream grade 1. But that's where we are. So that's, like I said, we'll see how that Harlan's Holiday Field transitions over to the Pegasus, joining Cyberknife and White Abarrio. I always get excited for Pegasus Day. That's not going to dampen my excitement for that race. We're going to have a lot of content, obviously, for Pegasus Day here on Trust the Profits. But there were other graded stakes races at Gulfstream Park on Saturday. And one of the big performances, in my opinion, was Frank's Rocket, a horse I absolutely love, but who I faded because of the kind of post Breeders' Cup hangover that we always see. Frank's Rocket had won in style in Charlestown. I was there that night. Love that horse. Always tries hard. I just thought after a kind of a mediocre to poor showing at the Breeders' Cup Filly and Mare Sprint, I thought Frank's Rocket, maybe wasn't going to be all the way cranked up for this race, maybe not all the way back, maybe missing a little something. Man, was I wrong. Frank's Rocket just whooped up on that field, won by over 10 lengths, and just absolutely obliterated the competition, which I thought was actually pretty good. And Frank's Rocket really showed a lot of class there, so shook off any Breeders' Cup hangover. She's a mare I really am excited about. In the Mr. Prospector, that was an interesting race. Papa Cap, who was my favorite to win, scratched on the morning of the race. I thought that changed the dynamics a lot. And I talked with Colin Sheehan about this on Doubling Down. I ended up kind of going to Sibelius as my second choice then once Papa Cap scratched. Sibelius, of course, did end up going off to win this race. I sat a perfect trip, I thought. I was worried this race was going to have too much pace. I think what they let Uncle Ernie go out and be that pace setter. I kind of warned, if you watch Colin Sheehan's Doubling Down episode, I warned people about trusting Uncle Ernie. I just thought this was a horse that, even though he went off as the morning line or the post time favorite, which was somewhat amazing to me, that speaks to, I think, the power of Irad Ortiz Jr. to some extent. But, that horse, I don't trust that Parks form coming down to Gulfstream Park all the time. And Uncle Ernie won a lot of races at Parks. I'm a native of Pennsylvania. I like Parks. We're going to talk a little bit about that track later, but ultimately, Sibelius just too much and too good of a horse. And this is a good win for Sibelius, who I think has had her shot. And, has had his shots a couple of times, and I just never really came through in a big spot, and this was the first graded stakes win for Sibelius. Had won some listed stakes races before, but this was the first graded stakes race. So a big win for Sibelius there. Obviously, congrats to the connections. And then in the Fort Lauderdale, City Man winning that race. Colonel Liam, that was really the big news, really flattening out. This is a horse that had fired off the layoff several times before, had run really, really well. Todd Pletcher's horse may not have been fully cranked up, will probably still be back for the Pegasus World Cup Invitational Turf, which Colonel Liam won last year. So this might have just been nothing more than getting a race under his belt a little bit. It has been off for 9 months, but really you could tell this horse was pretty well positioned and just flattened out down the stretch. City Man with a great ride from Rosario ends up getting that win and really, like I said, sat a beautiful trip and a nice ride. So moving away from Gulfstream Park, there was also some big news, and that was at Oaklawn Park. Oaklawn Park hosted the Smarty Jones on January 1st, New Year's Day, and this is a classic Derby prep race and was won by Victory Formation, a horse that remains undefeated for Brad Cox. Finishing second in this race was Angel of Empire, a long shot in the Brad Cox barn as well. Cox finishes 1-2 in the Smarty Jones. And the takeaway here is a few things. One, from a race perspective, Victory Formation got a great trip. The beautiful ride by Flavian Prat, I thought. There was a potential that Victory Formation was going to get strung a little wide. Western Ghent had showed some early speed as well, flashed it. You weren't sure if Victory Formation breaking from that 8 post was going to be able to cross and clear. But Flavian realized how important it was to get the lead on his own and to be on the inside. Really used up a little bit of speed early and just showed the talent that Victory Formation has to be able to get by Western Ghent going into that first turn and take the lead, crossing clear, and then wire to wire. I mean, was never challenged really after that. Western Ghent pulled up aside at one point, or kind of off of his hindquarters, but never really challenged in any meaningful way, and was 3 lengths clear by the time he kicked for home. So Victory Formation, just an incredibly dominant performance. Great effort there. The McPeak entries, the Asmussen entry, communication memo were non-factors in the race. The one McPeak horse, ran up for a late third place, but was well beaten and probably 8 lengths back. I just, maybe I'm getting a little bias here. I tend to fade Ken McPeak horses this time of year when the rubber hits the road. you know, it's the same thing. People got very excited about Rattle and Roll. People got very excited about Tiz the Bomb. People get excited about some of those horses, and then they don't really show up on the big day. And so I wasn't expecting a great performance from his two. Asmussen's communication memo running that poorly, I thought was notable. That's a horse I kind of liked a little bit. I thought might run well underneath, but the Cox Exacta was just too much. Now, bigger picture, the takeaway from this race, it's just Brad Cox has got an absolutely loaded stable for 2023 and the Derby Trail. I mean, he is going to have an obscene number of entries in all of these Derby preps across a lot of different tracks. He's going to have them down at New Orleans and the fairgrounds. He's going to have them at Oaklawn Park. He's going to have them at Keeneland come that season. He's going to have his best horses firing on 3 different circuits because he's got so many of them. I mean, he's got so many. Colin covers this stuff in great detail. If you haven't checked out his Derby prep news, please make sure to do that because he's the one who really dives into this week by week and follows all these Derby preps and dives into this stuff in greater detail than I do with the little race recaps. But, Cox's barn is just loaded this year, and we'll see who ends up rising to the top. But it's not like he's got 1 or 2 lottery tickets. He's got like 10 lottery tickets this year for 2-year-olds who are all super talented, have all shown a ton of ability. And I'm excited to see how this all ends up playing out because, like I said, he's got just a loaded barn this year to the point where you almost forget some of these other trainers. A trainer like Asmussen doesn't really have a ton of exciting 3-year-olds yet. You've not really seen that barn explode with big names. Chad Brown, you've not seen in terms of on the dirt. You've not necessarily seen a lot there. Now we still have some of the New York preps coming up, obviously later this spring, but that's something to just. It's really amazing to see just how many great 2-year-olds Cox has in his barn right now. Now 3-year-olds, I should say, in his barn. The other big news came out of course, Beverly Park, the horse that we always like to talk about, the hard-running horse, ran in his 30th start of the year on New Year's Eve on December 30th, ran in his 30th race and amazingly collected his 15th victory in 30 races. He won 50% of his entries this year. I want to say, including his last 3 in a row to finish the year on a really hot streak. So again, incredible effort by Beverly Park, running 30 times this year, winning 15 races. And just congrats to the connections. Congrats to this horse. Some horses can wheel back. We talked about this before. They can wheel back more quickly than others. And Beverly Park is a throwback horse that runs a ton of times and it seems to be super healthy, super fit, super durable. And I don't know if Beverly Park's ever going to be a stud. I doubt it at this point in their career, but you kind of want to pass those genes along a little bit because that's the sort of genes that, quite frankly, we need in horse racing. Horses that can just come back and run on 2 weeks' notice. Not that they all need to do that, but man, having a horse that just runs that often would be great. I mean, to some extent, that's why I like a horse like Simplification so much. I think Simplification's run 10 or 11 times this year, which is a lot for a 3-year-old on the Derby Trail to run that, I think, 11 times this year. So, you like to see those horses run a lot, and you certainly like to see them win. So congrats again to Beverly Park on a big win over the New Year's weekend. Well, let's talk about some track news. And we'll start out with on the West Coast with Santa Anita, who canceled their Sunday card due to inclement weather, a lot of rain out there. And so they ended up canceling their card. The Santa Ynez, which was supposed to be run, will be run this coming weekend instead. Some of the other races will be made up throughout the time on the rest of the meet. And so that was something where, again, we just had to kind of wait and see on some of the races out there. Obviously, one of the big pieces of news, Frankie Dettori continuing to run very well, particularly on that downhill turf course. Not surprising that the the turf course that is most similar in some ways to a European course is one that Frankie's running really well on. But Frankie's, we talked about this, picking up good rides, but giving great rides to horses, even if they aren't the favorites. And continued congrats to him on his farewell tour as he's retiring this year. But certainly paying attention to where Dettori mounts up is going to be critical if you're playing Santa Anita. And like I said, this weekend on our Capping the Card, I'm going to have Josh Rodriguez from On the Wrong Lead. We're going to talk about Santa Anita this coming weekend and capping that Saturday card at Santa Anita. So make sure to check that out. Now, I mentioned that we were going to talk about Parks a little bit. Parks has had their issues. Unfortunately, we saw two horses go down in one race. One horse was heels clipped. The other horse broke down after crossing the finish line. Very sad to see. We never want to see this. Parks, of course, had been dealing with a lot of freezing and thawing of the track that, of course, really messes up some of the dirt and the surface conditions. And so that's something the park superintendent had been really working on. Parks had canceled their card last week, basically, for pretty much the whole week and just started running again. So they're doing their best. They did seal the track after that particular race the other day, and there were no other incidents after they sealed the track. Obviously hope that they for continued maintenance, but this is an issue this time of year, particularly for those northeastern tracks, whether you're looking at Aqueduct, whether you're looking at Parks, whether you're looking at Mahoning Valley, some of these tracks up in the northern part of the country, that freezing and thawing is always going to be an issue. Obviously, always want to pay attention to track conditions. It's also a reason why a track like Belmont, I'm really interested to see how that comes back, because obviously with all the construction they've been doing, they've been working around the home stretch a little bit in terms of working the tunnel that's going to go underneath into the infield. But anytime you start messing around with the track, you start to worry about breakdowns, horse safety, all of this stuff. We saw this a couple of years ago at Santa Anita. We saw this last year at Laurel Park up in Maryland, where when you start doing repairs to that home stretch or any part of the track, it really starts to be a problem. And so it became a problem in terms of horses even working out on those tracks in some instances. So hoping that Parks gets those issues cleaned up, hoping that Belmont, once it's back running, is safe, and hoping that this winter weather allows for safe running throughout the country. Now, in terms of New York and some of that winter weather, we got some news that it's going to be heating up this Thursday because there is a $189,000 late pick five carryover that will be Thursday races 4 through 8 on that Thursday card. If you're interested in this, Colin Sheehan and I are going to do a little bit of a preview of that late pick five. This was a carryover because nobody hit the pick 6 on New Year's Day. And so they paid out for 5 out of 6. And as a result, the pick 5 carried over to the next time they ran, which is, of course, Thursday. So we get the late pick 5 carryover at Aqueduct on Thursday for $189,000. Like I said, check out the video Colin Sheehan and I are going to have up later in the week previewing that. That should be up actually Wednesday morning, probably. So plenty of time to have you check that out before Thursday's races. Now let's head over and talk a little bit about a jockey who is sometimes divisive, but sometimes I think somebody who deserves a lot of sympathy, and that is Kent Desormeaux. Kent Desormeaux has struggled with alcoholism very publicly for many, many years. He's had legal and criminal issues. He's done some things that are truly awful. I can't condone under any circumstances. But he is back, and he is trying to clean himself up for another time. It's been an ongoing struggle of his. And he is back running at Turfway Park. He actually won 2 of his 3 mounts at Turfway Park over the weekend. And all I can do is wish Kent Desormeaux all the best. This is a 3-time Kentucky Derby jockey champion. This is a 3-time Eclipse Award winner. This is one of the great jockeys that we have. And he has had his life completely derailed because of addiction. And that is something which I am very sad to see, and just hopeful that he can get his life back on track, contribute to the sport that he's given so much to already, and get his personal life cleaned up as well, so that he can make amends for all the things that he's done. And this is something that, over the holiday season, I think we all binge watch shows, we all watch new programs, or we have time to have a little downtime. This might not sound like a very exciting show, but I watched the show Dope Sick on Hulu about the opioid crisis that really hit Appalachia and other parts of the country. And I have to say, when you see people struggling with addiction. And I've definitely seen that from my time working in higher education, from my time living in the Carolinas and Virginia. You definitely see that. And it is very sad. And you just hope people can get their lives cleaned up. And you hope that Kent Desormeaux in this case can certainly get his life cleaned up, get back on the right track, make amends for the things that he's done, and hopefully, fingers crossed, live a very clean life moving forward. And every day work hard to continue to stay clean and sober as he's continued to struggle with alcoholism and addiction. So we obviously are sending all the best to Kent in that struggle, which we know is a daily thing. And like I said, wish him all the best. Now we're going to finish up with a bit of news that we've talked a lot about on the show, which is the Eclipse Awards. And the Eclipse Awards, of course, are out. And if you pay attention to horse racing Twitter, a lot of people, a lot of voters are releasing their Eclipse Award ballots. I always love that. I love transparency. David Aragona, Craig Milkowski from Timeform, got a lot of people who are releasing their ballots, letting people see them. So I always like that. Whether you agree with their ballots or not, I appreciate the transparency of saying, this is how I voted, and putting it out there in the public and holding yourself accountable and letting people know. Now, one of the things that came up as a result of that is that a lot of people started feeling strongly because several voters, and I don't think any of the ones that I claimed, but several voters abstained from voting on the steeplechase, which is one of the divisions, it's best steeplechase horse. And this is a division that a lot of people don't follow. And voters can abstain from voting, and they just left their ballots blank. Now, this got a lot of people agitated. And I'll be honest, I do have a little bit of an opinion on this, which is that if you have been given the right to vote on this, listen, we watch races all the time. I think most adamant racing fans could sit down and fill out an Eclipse Award ballot pretty intelligently without any problem for 90% of the divisions. I do think steeplechase is one of those divisions that does not get a lot of public press. Okay. We see it every once in a while. You have figures like Jessica Paquette, who's the race caller at Parks, but who does a lot in terms of that steeplechase world. Carrie Byron does a lot in terms of that steeplechase world. So there's horses out there, there are trainers out there, there are people out there who are always pushing that steeplechase. We're starting to see that become a little bit more popular here in the United States. But what I'll say is it really that hard to go back and watch a bunch of replays? Is it really that challenging to go back and look at some PPs? I mean, this should not be that difficult to be able to go back, watch old races. It's not like steeplechase is running every week. It's not like you have to keep up with some maiden claimers that are running, 20 times a year. These steeplechase races, and particularly the graded steeplechase races, the big ones, are run a few times throughout the year. It doesn't take a lot to go back and watch the replays, look at the PPs, put your critical thinking hat on and figure out who you think the top three are. Now, if you genuinely want to abstain, I get it. I personally think that if you abstain for more than 3 years in a row from a particular division, that you should have your voting rights revoked. I can understand maybe skipping 1 year and abstaining 1 year. Something happened. Maybe you're too busy. I maybe understand that. Maybe 2 years, okay. Maybe you're put on some sort of a probation. But if you abstain from voting in the division for 3 straight years, then stop voting. Then just stop it, because you clearly are not interested in investing quite literally a few hours to really becoming and educating yourself on this particular division. Again, how hard would it be to sit there and watch all of Epicenter's, Taba's, Cyberknife, and Modern Games races? I mean, really, think of that. Think about how quickly you could sit down and watch those 4 races, those 4 horses races, and go, who do I think's the best 3-year-old? That's probably the most hotly contested area, the most hotly contested division. Wouldn't take that long to sit down and do that. So I don't understand how we can't do that for the steeplechase division. That somehow this is a bridge too far. Well, the horses are jumping. I can't possibly know anything about this. Then educate yourself. If you're a national turf rider, then educate yourself. Okay. Now, if you're just a casual fan who turns in and out, I get it. If you're not educated on that division, that's fine. But if you're being entrusted to vote for this, then educate yourself. And if you can't educate yourself, quite frankly, get the hell out of the way for somebody else who can. That's just my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see. But that's my little, I'm already getting fired up in 2023. So listen, I hope everybody had a great start to their new year. We all here, Trust the Profits, are wishing you all of the best in 2023. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. We have so much coverage in terms of the Derby prep, the Breeders' Cup Trail. We're going to have so much content for you here at the Trust the Profits on a weekly basis, from handicapping to betting picks to race recaps to Derby Trail, etc. We have so much. Make sure to follow. Make sure to throw me a follow on Twitter as well at the handle @FailedToMenace. Until next time, friends, my name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races and reminding you that it's now post time.